Welcome to Dad's Revenge, where quiet men prove that patience is a strength. Each story here is about a father who is underestimated, disrespected, or betrayed by the very people who should be protecting him, and how that father finds his own way to mend things. Welcome to today's story. The morning my grandson saved my life. The sun was warm on the steps of Ebenezer Baptist, and the choir was still humming inside. I was 72 years old, standing in the church parking lot in a suit that had seen 15 Easters, when a boy of 16 grabbed my sleeve and pulled me behind my own car like the building was on fire. His name is Nasir, and he has my late wife's eyes. He looked over his shoulder twice before he spoke, and when he did, his voice was so low I had to lean down to catch it. "Grandpa," he said, "I heard Dad and Mom talking last night. They think you're losing your mind. They're going to try to prove it." I laughed. God forgive me, I laughed, because the idea was so absurd it belonged in a comic strip. My son Cairo and his wife Valentina, both of them grown and comfortable plotting against an old school teacher who clipped coupons and drove a car older than the boy in front of me. It made no sense, but Nasir did not laugh. His jaw was tight, the way his grandmother's used to get when she was frightened but refused to show it. And that more than his words made the cold settle into my chest. "Tell me exactly what you heard I said," he swallowed. "Mom said if they could get a doctor to say you don't remember things, they could get something called conservatorship. Dad said the house and the accounts and then Green Meadows." He looked at me. "Grandpa, Green Meadows is that place off the highway, the one where they put people to forget about them." I knew Green Meadows. 30 years ago as a principal, I had visited a former custodian of mine who ended his days there. I remembered the smell of bleach laid over something worse and the rows of wheelchairs facing a television nobody had turned on. It was a place you sent a man when you wanted the world to stop asking about him. Now understand something about me. For 36 years, I stood in front of classrooms and later at the head of a school, and I learned to keep my face still when the ground moved under me. A principal who panics loses the room. So I kept my face still for Nasir. I put my hand on his shoulder the way I used to steady frightened freshmen on the first day. "You did right telling me," I said. "You did exactly right. Now I need you to do one more thing, and it is the hardest thing. I need you to act like you never heard a word. Can you do that for me?" He nodded, though his eyes were wet. "Go on back inside," I told him. "Sit with your mother. Smile. Let them think everything is ordinary." He went. I watched him climb the steps, square his thin shoulders and disappear through the red doors into the singing. And I stood alone by my old car with the whole warm morning gone cold around me. People passed and greeted me. "Deacon Hurst, good morning." "Morning, Deacon." I smiled and nodded and shook their hands, and inside I was somewhere else entirely. I was doing arithmetic, the oldest habit I have. I was adding up the small, strange things I had let myself ignore. The reading glasses I always kept on the kitchen counter, gone one morning, found a week later inside the refrigerator. I had told myself I was tired. The unpaid electric bill I had no memory of receiving, discovered crumpled in my coat pocket by Valentina, who had shaken her head so sadly. The night the stove was found burning with nothing on it, and Cairo standing there saying, "Dad, we have to talk about this. We really do." I had blamed my age. I had lain awake wondering if the boy inside those red doors would one day watch me become a stranger to myself. And all the while they had been building something, brick by brick. Not a house, a case. I took out my phone with a hand that did not shake, because I would not permit it to, and I scrolled to a number I had called for 40 years. Patrick Turner, my lawyer. My oldest living friend. The man who buried Adelie beside me and never once let me stand at that grave alone. He answered on the second ring, warm and unhurried. "Stephen, to what do I owe the pleasure on the Lord's Day?" "Patrick," I said, and something in my voice must have carried across the line because I heard him go still. "I need you to tell me everything you know about conservatorship. And I need you to tell me whether my son can have me declared incompetent." There was a long silence. "Where are you?" he said. His voice had changed completely. "Church parking lot." "Get in your car," Patrick said. "Don't go to Cairo's. Don't go anywhere near them tonight. Drive home, lock your door, and call me the second you walk in." I look back at the red doors behind which my grandson was sitting beside the two people who wanted to erase me. 40 years ago, I would have wept. That morning, I did not. Before I was an old man, I was a keeper of records. I graded, I documented, I kept every mark in a ledger. No student ever argued with because the numbers were always true. They wanted a senile old fool who couldn't be trusted with his own name. It was time I decided to open a brand new ledger, and this time I would be the one keeping score. The drive home took 20 minutes, and I do not remember a second of it. My body handled the turns while my mind ran the numbers. When I pulled into the driveway of the little brick house on Auburn Avenue, the one Adelie and I bought in 1979, I went inside, locked the deadbolt behind me, and called Patrick back. He picked up before the first ring finished. "Tell me you're home," he said. "I'm home. Door's locked. Now talk to me, Patrick. Plain words, no lawyer fog." I heard him exhale, and the clink of ice in the glass, the sound of a man who had gotten up from his Sunday afternoon and gone straight to his study. "All right," he said. "Plain words. Conservatorship is when a court decides a grown adult can no longer manage his own affairs and hands that power to somebody else. A conservator. That person controls the money, the property, the medical decisions, where you live, what you spend, whether you can sign your own name to anything. And a son can ask for this over his own father. Anyone can petition Stephen. A child, a spouse. The court is supposed to protect vulnerable people, and it does protect some. But the same door that keeps the wolves out can be walked through by a wolf holding the right paperwork." I lowered myself into the armchair by the window, the one where Adelie used to read. "What does the paperwork need?" "A petition," he said, "and an affidavit. And here is the part I need you to hear clearly. The strongest thing they can bring is a physician's evaluation. A doctor who will swear under oath that you show cognitive decline, memory loss, disorientation, an inability to manage your own finances or keep yourself safe." I closed my eyes. "Valentina," I said quietly. "Say that again?" "My daughter-in-law is a doctor, Patrick, internal medicine. She has a license, colleagues, a signature that a judge would never think to question." I was quiet a moment. "She doesn't need to find a crooked doctor. She is the doctor." The line went silent. When Patrick spoke again, the warmth had drained out of his voice and left something hard underneath. "Then this is worse than I hoped," he said. "A family member physician gives them enormous cover. If she documents a pattern over weeks' incidents, dates, witnesses, and writes it up in clinical language, that affidavit will look airtight to a busy judge. And you said the boy heard them mention the house and the accounts. And Green Meadows. Then the motive is money. The method is medicine. And the destination is a state facility where you would have no phone and no way to fight back. Stephen, listen to me. If they file an emergency petition and get a judge to sign a temporary order before you can respond, they can freeze you out of your own life in a single afternoon. You could be sitting in that armchair one morning and be a ward of the state by supper." I looked around the room, the bookshelves I built, the photograph of Adelie on the mantel, her smile caught forever at our 30th anniversary, the ledger of a whole life at risk of being torn out by my own child. "How long?" I asked. "How long do these things take to build?" "Weeks usually," he said. "They need a pattern. One bad night isn't enough." Which means if they've started, they are collecting incidents right now. Every strange thing they can stage or invent goes into that file. The glasses in the refrigerator, the stove, the bill in my coat pocket. "Yes," Patrick said softly. I heard the pity in it, and I could not stand the pity. "Stephen, my legal advice is that we get ahead of this. Tomorrow I file a preemptive petition affirming your capacity. We get you evaluated by a neutral physician of our choosing. We build our own record before they finish theirs." It was good advice. It was the safe advice. And I sat there in Adelie's chair and turned it over the way I used to turn over a student's excuse, looking for the hole in it. "No," I said. "Number." "If we move now, Patrick, they'll see it. They'll know I know, and they will simply stop, wait, and start again in 6 months when I've let my guard down. I will spend the rest of my life waiting for the knife." I looked at the mantel. I need more than a defense. I need it to end. Once. Completely. Which means I need them to keep building their case right up until the moment I take it away from them and turn it around. You're talking about letting them think they're winning. I'm talking about letting them commit to it in writing, on record, with witnesses. Everything they're staging to hang me. I paused. I spent 36 years watching people show me exactly who they were when they thought no one was grading them. Let them show me. Patrick was quiet a long time. Then he said, "This is dangerous, Stephen. If it goes wrong, if that doctor signs before we're ready, I may not be able to pull you back out."
I know. And I need to say the other thing, he said gently, because I'm your friend before I'm your lawyer.
That's your son. Are you sure you want to see the bottom of this? I looked at the photograph of my wife, and I thought about the boy with her eyes squaring his thin shoulders and walking back into that church to sit beside people who wanted his grandfather gone. I already know the bottom, I said. I just need it on tape. Then get some rest, Patrick said. Tomorrow we start quietly. And Stephen, don't let them see your eyes change. I hung up, and I sat in the dark until the streetlights came on. Before I was an old man, I had spent a career learning that the truth keeps if you write it down. Tomorrow, I would begin writing this one down. Not with a pen this time, with a lens. That night, I did not sleep. I made a pot of coffee I did not drink and sat at the kitchen table where I had graded 36 years of homework. And I talked to my wife. Adelie has been gone 2 years, but I still talk to her. The grief counselor at church says that is healthy, and I've decided to believe her. Her photograph sits on the mantel, but it is in the kitchen that I feel her, because that is where she lived. That is where she read my papers over my shoulder and told me which students I was being too hard on. "Adelie," I said to the empty chair across from me, "our boy wants to bury me alive." The refrigerator hummed, the old clock ticked, and in the quiet, I let myself remember the thing almost no one alive knows about Stephen Hurst. The world sees a retired school teacher in a 15-year-old suit, a man who clips coupons and drives a Buick with 190,000 miles on it. A deacon who puts a modest, careful envelope in the collection plate. That man is real. I am not pretending to be him, but he is not the whole ledger. In 1981, when I was a young teacher watching my students fail algebra, not because they were slow, but because the textbook was written by people who had never met a child like them, I sat at this table and wrote my own. Plain language, real examples, problems about bus routes and grocery bills and the interest on a loan, so a child could see that the numbers were about his own life. I called it Everyday Algebra. I photocopied it for my own classes for 3 years before a small educational publisher asked to print it. I never got rich the way a man in the movies gets rich. But that book and the 2 that followed it went into hundreds of schools across the South and then across the country. Every few years a new edition. Every edition, a modest royalty. And a young teacher does not spend a royalty check. He invests it. Quietly, patiently. The way Adelie taught me because her mother had cleaned houses and saved dimes in a coffee can. And Adelie understood money the way a farmer understands weather. We put it all into a trust. I named it after her, the Adelie Trust. Over 40 years, dividends reinvested small and steady and never touched it has become something I do not say out loud because the number does not fit the man in the 15-year-old suit, and I never wanted it to. I never wanted my son to look at me and see a bank. I wanted him to see a father. So I let him think I was scraping by. God help me, I thought I was teaching him something. I thought if Cairo believed there was no fortune to inherit, he would build his own character instead of waiting on mine. I thought I was protecting him from the softness that ruins the children of rich men. I sat in that kitchen and understood for the first time what my silence had actually done. I had not built his character. I had built his resentment. He had grown up believing his father was a small man, and somewhere along the way, watching other men buy boats and second homes, he decided being the son of a small man was an insult he did not deserve. He had gone chasing the fortune he thought I had failed to earn, and now drowning in whatever hole he had dug. He had come back to the small old man he was ashamed of, not for help, but for harvest. He did not know about the Adelie Trust, neither did Valentina. That was the one card still face down on the table. I turned my coffee cup in my hands and let the anger come all the way for the first time. Not the hot anger that makes a man shout, the cold kind. The kind I used to feel when a colleague put his hands on a child. The kind that does not raise its voice because it does not need to. Then I got up and I went to the hall closet and I reached to the high shelf behind the winter coats where I keep the things I no longer use but cannot throw away. There was a shoebox up there. Inside it, wrapped in a soft cloth, were 3 small cameras. Years ago, when the church had trouble with someone stealing from the food pantry, I had bought them, learned to set them, and quietly solved the problem without a single accusation, a single raised voice. When it was done, I wrapped them up and put them away, and I prayed I would never need them for family. I carried the box back to the kitchen and set it on the table where everyday algebra was born. I lifted the lid. In the dim light, the little black lenses looked back at me like patient, honest eyes. They wanted the world to believe I could no longer be trusted with my own name. All right, let them come into my house and perform their play. Let them move my glasses and burn my empty stove and shake their heads for the neighbors. Every performance needs an audience. I was about to give them one they could not see. Rest easy, Adelie, I said, and closed my hand around the first camera. I know exactly what our boy is, and I know exactly what to do about it. It took me 2 evenings to place the cameras, and I did it the way I once laid out an examination so that nothing looked like what it was. The first went into the kitchen, tucked into the grill of an old radio on the counter that had not played in years. From there it saw the whole room. The stove they liked to blame, the drawer where my keys lived, the table. The second I hid in the living room, inside a hollowed paperback on the shelf angled at the front door and the armchair. The third I set in the hallway, in the frame of a photograph of Adelie, so that her picture watched the very hall where they moved my glasses and my mail and my mind, or pretended to. I tested each one from my phone, sitting in the dark, until I could see every corner of the stage they had chosen. Then I made myself ready for the harder part. Because a camera only records what happens in front of it, and for it to catch them, I had to let them keep coming. Cairo came on a Wednesday, as he had taken to doing with a key I had given him years ago for emergencies, and he had since decided meant the house was half his already. I heard the lock turn while I was in my chair with the newspaper. I did not get up. I folded the paper slowly and arranged my face into the one they had taught me to wear, the one that was a little too slow, a little too soft around the eyes. Dad Cairo called in the loud, careful voice people use for the very old and the hard of hearing, though my ears are fine. "It's me. You okay in here?" "I'm fine, son," I said, "just reading." He came in and stood over me, and I looked up at my boy. 41 years old now, in a jacket that cost too much and shoes that cost more, and underneath the good clothes a tiredness that no amount of good clothes could hide. There were shadows under his eyes. His hands moved when they had nothing to do. A man who owes money looks a certain way, and I had spent a lifetime learning to read faces. My son looked like a man being chased. For one foolish moment, the father in me wanted to set the paper down and say, "Cairo, whatever it is, tell me I have more than you think. Let me help you. Let me carry it." 40 years of instinct pulling in one direction. Then I remembered the boy with Adelie's eyes whispering in a parking lot. And I kept my face soft and slow and said nothing true. "You been eating?" Cairo asked, walking a slow circle through my living room, the way he always did. Now his eyes touching things, the mail on the side table, the pill organizer I did not need but kept out for their benefit. He was taking inventory. He was checking his props. "I ate," I said. "Valentina brought a plate sundae." "Good," he said. "Good." Then, casual as weather, "You remember I came by Monday?" I had not seen him Monday. He had not come Monday. I understood at once that this was a brick. He was laying one right in front of me to see if I would carry it for him. "Monday," I said slowly, and let a small confusion cloud my face. I frowned. "Did you? I thought that was..." I trailed off and looked at my hands, and I let him watch me fail to find it. "Yeah, Dad," he said, and there was something almost gentle in it, which was the worst thing I have ever heard. That gentleness, because I knew now what it was for. "It's okay. You forget sometimes, that's all." It's okay. He wanted me to doubt myself. He wanted the ground under my own memory to feel soft, so that when the day came and a judge asked me if I was sure, some part of me would no longer be. It is a cruel thing to make a man distrust his own mind. It is one of the cruelest things one person can do to another, and my son did it to me in my own living room with a tenderness in his voice. Behind his shoulder on the bookshelf, a hollow paperback with a small dark lens was writing it all down. Every word. The false Monday, the gentle poison, the inventory of an old man's props. It was going into a record that did not forget and did not doubt itself, and could not be talked out of what it had plainly seen. I let my eyes go vague. Maybe I did forget, I murmured. I'm sorry, son. Don't be sorry, he said, and patted my shoulder, and I made myself sit still under his hand. We're going to take care of you, me and Val. We're going to make sure you're safe. You don't have to worry about anything anymore. Then he left, and I heard his expensive car pull away, and I sat alone in the quiet, with my heart beating slow and hard. I took out my phone. I opened the app. I watched the last 5 minutes play back my son leaning over me, that gentle voice, that lie about Monday. All of it clean and sharp and permanent. Then I saved the file and I named it. I did not call it evidence. I have always believed a thing should be named for what it truly is. I called it Lesson 1. Valentina came on Sunday, and she brought a plate because she had learned that a covered plate is the perfect disguise for a visit that is really an inspection. I want to tell you about my daughter-in-law, because a man should describe his enemy honestly. Valentina is a physician, internal medicine, a good practice on the north side, framed diplomas, a voice she can make as smooth and warm as a heating pad. When she married my son 18 years ago, I stood up at the reception and told the room that a doctor in the family was a blessing, because she would keep us all healthy into old age. Everyone laughed. I meant it. God forgive me. I meant every word. She came in that Sunday in soft clothes. No white coat, just a woman bringing supper to her husband's aging father. She set the plate down and looked around my kitchen the way Cairo looked around my living room, except that she saw more because she was trained to. Where he took inventory, she took vitals. Her eyes went to my hands, watching for a tremor. To my feet, watching my gait as I crossed the room. To my eyes, my color, the buttons of my shirt, whether they were done in the right holes. She was reading me like a chart. Sit down, Dad, she said warmly. Let me get you a drink. You look a little unsteady today. I was not unsteady. I had walked 6 blocks that morning without a cane. But I sat because I understood by now that every word out of her mouth was a line she was writing in a file. And I wanted to see the whole file before I closed it on her. She went to my cabinet, and she passed over the glasses, the good ones Adelie and I got for our wedding. And instead, she took down a plastic cup. A child's cup, red with a lid, the kind you buy in a bag of 8. I did not own such a cup. She had brought it in her bag and put it in my cabinet on some earlier visit, so that when this moment came, it would already be there. Already look like mine. Already look like something a declining old man kept because he could no longer be trusted with glass. Here, she said, filling it with water and setting it in front of me. This is easier for you. We don't want any accidents. I looked at that red plastic cup on the table where I had signed my mortgage and graded 10,000 papers and held my wife's hand the week before she died. And I felt the humiliation rise in me hot the way they wanted it to. And I understood that the humiliation was itself part of the design. They needed me small. They needed me to feel like the thing they were describing, because a man who feels like an invalid begins little by little to move like one. Thank you, I said, and wrapped both hands around the cup like a man grateful for the help. I even let my hands shake a little, the tremor they were hunting for, and I watched something flicker across her face. Satisfaction. She had it now, the tremor. And she did not know I had given it to her on purpose. The way you hand a pickpocket the wallet you want him caught holding. She took out her phone then, and she did not even hide it well. She typed. I knew what she was typing. Patient exhibits hand tremor, uses adaptive drinkware, appears unsteady on his feet, poor safety awareness. In the smooth clinical language that would look to a tired judge like the honest concern of a caring doctor, and not what it was, which was a woman building a cage one clean sentence at a time. She stayed an hour. She moved my medications to a different shelf, and then asked me gently if I remembered where I kept them, and wrote down that I did not. She asked me the date, and when I gave it correctly, changed the subject as though I had failed. She left a faucet running in the bathroom and later remarked to no one in particular how a person really should remember to turn off the water. Nothing I did right would be written down, only what could be twisted. That is the thing about a person who has already decided what you are. They do not observe you, they convict you and then collect the proof afterward, the way a farmer scatters seed and comes back for the harvest he always intended. When she thought I had gone to lie down, I stood in the dark of the hallway instead beside Adelie's photograph, beside the small lens inside it, and I heard her on the phone in my kitchen, her voice low and no longer warm at all. "It's coming together," she said. "A few more weeks and the file's thick enough. Between the stove and the keys and today and Cairo's incidents, no judge is going to look twice." She paused. I know, Cairo. Soon. And then we never have to drive out to this sad little house again. This sad little house, where my wife died, where our son learned to walk. I stood very still in the dark, and I let her words go into Adelie's picture and be kept. Then I went to bed and I did not sleep, but I was not troubled. A teacher learns to be patient with a student who thinks the test is almost over. She had no idea the real examination had not yet begun. Up to that point, everything they did had been done in private between the four walls of my house, where it was their word against mine. But a case built on private incidents has a weakness, and a doctor as careful as Valentina knew it. She needed a witness who was not family. She needed a neighbor. Her name is Miranda de Leon, and she has lived across the street from me for 9 years. She is a kind woman, a churchgoer, the sort who brings soup when she hears you have a cough. She has no malice in her at all, which is exactly why they chose her. An honest witness is worth more than a paid one because a jury believes the honest one, and so does a judge. And so God help me would I. They arranged it for a Saturday morning when Miranda does her gardening and the whole street can see her. Cairo and Valentina came together, parked in the driveway, and made a small pleasant show of arriving to check on Dad. I watched from the window as Valentina crossed the street first, all warmth, to say good morning to Miranda over the fence, to plant herself there in easy view to make sure there would be eyes. Then she came inside and the performance began. I had already found what they had hidden. That morning before they came, I had gone to make my coffee and found my car keys sitting in the butter compartment of the refrigerator door. I had not put them there. I never had, not once in 72 years. But I understood the moment I saw them what they were for, and so I did the hardest thing, which was nothing. I left them exactly where they lay. I let the trap stay set, because I finally understood that a trap only catches the one who springs it. Dad Valentina called bright and loud from the kitchen. "Have you seen your car keys? Cairo can't find them anywhere." I came in slow, playing my part. "I don't know," I said. "On the hook, aren't they?" "They're not on the hook," Cairo said, with a heavy performing worry. "We've looked everywhere. Dad, we've been looking for 10 minutes. And then Valentina, right on her cue, drifted to the refrigerator as though a thought had just struck her, and opened it, and went very still, and said in a voice pitched to carry through the screen door and across the yard, "Oh, Dad, oh no. Dad, your keys are in the refrigerator again." Again. That word again doing so much work. And then she turned and called through the door, sweet and sorrowful, "Miranda, honey, could you come here a second?" And Miranda, wiping her hands on her gardening apron, crossed the street and stepped into my kitchen and saw with her own honest eyes a doctor holding a set of car keys she had taken from a refrigerator and a confused old man standing there with nothing to say. "Oh, Stephen," Miranda said softly, and the pity in her face was real, and it was the worst thing in the room, worse than anything Valentina could manufacture, because it was true feeling aimed by liars. I looked at the floor. I let my mouth work without words. I let them have it, the whole tableau, the neighbor, the keys, the shame. Because 8 feet away, on the counter, inside the grill of a radio that had not played a note in years, a small dark lens was watching a very different scene than the one Miranda thought she saw. It was watching a woman open a refrigerator she already knew held the keys.
It was watching her performance land a half-second before she could have known where to look. It was watching Cairo not search, but wait. To Miranda, it was a sad morning with a failing old man. On the recording played back later for people who knew what to watch for, it was a choreography. It was theater with the house lights left on. They thanked Miranda. They walked her back across the street, all concerned, and I watched Valentina lean in close and say something low, and Miranda nod gravely, and I knew she was being enlisted gently as a witness who would one day tell a courtroom what she had seen with her own eyes and swear it was the truth. And it would be the truth. That was the terrible cleverness of it. She would not be lying. She would simply be wrong and certain and believed. When they were gone, I took the keys out of the refrigerator and I held them in my hand cold from the cold of the box. And I did not feel beaten. I felt the opposite. For weeks, I had been the one on the back foot, absorbing their blows, swallowing the shame, letting them write their lies into a file I could not see. But a witness cuts both ways. The moment they reached for Miranda, they handed me something I had not had before. A person outside the family who would one day have to reconcile what she believed with what was real. And there is no force on earth stronger than an honest person who discovers she has been used. Because they had just made their first real mistake. They had brought in an outsider. They had put their play in front of a camera and an honest woman on the same morning. And one day in a room of my choosing, I would set the two side by side. What Miranda believed and what the lens had recorded. And her certainty would turn to horror. And her horror would land squarely on the two people who had spent it. I went to my phone and I opened the app and I saved the morning's file with the others. Lesson 2. I named it. The class was filling up. The seer came to me on a Thursday after school on his bicycle, the same red 10-speed I had bought him for his 13th birthday. He leaned it against my porch rail the way he always had, but he came up the steps slowly, and when I opened the door, I saw that my grandson had not been sleeping either. "Come in, son," I said. "There's cornbread." He sat at the kitchen table, at the same spot he had sat since he was small enough to need a cushion on the chair. And he did not touch the cornbread, and for a while, he did not speak. I let him be. I have learned that a young person will tell you the truth if you can bear to sit inside the silence long enough without filling it. "Grandpa," he finally said, "I feel like a traitor." To who? To everybody. He turned his glass in his hands, my grandmother's gesture, and he did not know he was doing it. If I tell you what they're doing, I'm betraying my mom and dad, and if I don't tell you, I'm betraying you. There's no way to be a good person here. Every road is dirty. He looked up at me, and his eyes were shining. How do I do the right thing when there is no right thing? I want you to understand what it cost me to answer that honestly. Because the easy thing would have been to comfort him, to tell him it was not so bad, that his parents loved him, that grown-ups sometimes made mistakes. That is what a grandfather is supposed to say. But I had spent 36 years with young people, and I knew that the deepest injury you can do to a good young mind is to lie to it in order to make it feel better. Because a child who is lied to kindly learns to distrust his own eyes. And that is the very wound Cairo was trying to open in me. So I did not lie to him. "Nasir," I said, "look at me. You are not the one who dirtied this road. Your father and mother did that, and they did it long before you ever overheard a word. You did not create this choice. You only found yourself standing in the middle of it. And a person who is handed an impossible choice by someone else does not become guilty by choosing. He becomes brave." "But they're my parents," he whispered. "They are," I said. "And that will always be true. And it is right that you love them. Loving someone does not mean helping them do a terrible thing. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for a person is refuse to let them become the worst version of themselves without a witness. You didn't come here to hurt your parents, son. You came here to stop them from doing something they can never take back. That is not betrayal. That is the only real loyalty there is." He was quiet a long time. Then he said the thing he had really come to say. The thing under the thing. "If it all comes apart," he said, "if you win or whatever, this is what happens to me. Where do I go?" He was 16 and trying to sound like it did not frighten him and failing, the way we all fail at that. I reached across the table and put my hand over his,
and I felt how cold it was. "You listen to me now," I said, and I made my voice the one I used to use at the front of a room when I needed every child in it to believe me. "Whatever happens to your mother and father is the harvest of what they planted, and it is not yours to carry. But you will always have a place. As long as I am breathing, there is a door in this world that opens for you, and a chair at a table that is yours. And it does not depend on you being useful to me, or quiet for me, or anything at all except being who you are. You did a hard, honest thing. A man does not forget who stood with him when standing cost something. Do you hear me?" He nodded, and then my grandson, who was almost a man and still very much a boy, put his head down on the kitchen table and cried the way you cry when someone finally tells you that you are not going to be thrown away. I let him. I put my hand on the back of his neck and I let him get it out, and I thought, not for the first time, that these two people had a son worth 10 of them and did not deserve him, and were about to lose him, and would never once understand why. When he was done, he wiped his face embarrassed and ate 2 pieces of cornbread, because a boy that age is always hungry, even in grief. And that made me smile for the first time in days. Before he left at the door, he stopped. "Grandpa," he said, "are you going to be okay?" I looked at him, at Adley's eyes and his young face, and I told him the truest thing I knew. "Nasir," I said, "I have been keeping records my whole life, and I promise you, this account is going to balance." He rode off into the gold of the late afternoon, and I stood on the porch until he turned the corner. Then I went back inside to the work that was waiting, harder now and clearer. For weeks I had let them come to me. Now it was time I went to them. I had recorded what they did in my house, but a case like a proof needs both sides. I had their method. I did not yet have their motive, not in black and white. And a motive written down is worth 10 motives merely suspected. The chance came on a Sunday. Cairo and Valentina take Nasir to her mother's every second Sunday, an all-day affair 2 hours south. And they had made the mistake weeks earlier of giving me a key to their house for the times they wanted me watched from the inside. So on that Sunday, after their car had been gone long enough to be sure, I drove out to the big house in the north suburb, the one with the columns Cairo could not afford, and I let myself in. I had not been inside it alone before. It struck me how little of a home it was. Everything in it was staged for an audience, the way their visits to me were staged. The good rugs and the leather and the enormous television. And under all of it, when you looked, the small tells of a man drowning. The stack of unopened mail with the red borders. The second and third notices. A house dressed like wealth and starving underneath. Which is the most American thing there is, and the saddest. His office was at the end of the hall. I went in and sat down at his desk in his chair, and I did not hurry, because a man who hurries misses things, and I had taught myself long ago to read a room the way I read a struggling student, looking not at what is loud, but at what is hidden. On the wall were framed photographs of Cairo shaking hands with men in good suits, ribbon cuttings, groundbreakings, the small ceremonies of a man who needed the world to see him succeeding. There was not one photograph of his own son in that room, not one of his mother. I noted it the way I note everything, and I moved on. The desk drawers told the beginning of the story. Credit card statements, 3 cards, all near their limits, a home equity line already drawn down to nothing, and then the folder that told the middle of it. A glossy folder from a development company, Coastal Ridge, with Cairo's name on a partnership agreement, and a number on the investment line that stopped my breath. $600,000. My son had put $600,000 into a coastal development, and clipped to the back was the rest of the story. A letter from the same company, dated 4 months ago, regretting to inform its partners that the project had failed, permitting that the land was encumbered, that their capital was in the soft, murderous language of such letters, not presently recoverable. Gone. He had taken everything he had and everything the banks would lend against a house, dressed up to look like wealth, and he had poured it into a hole in the ground by the sea, and the hole had closed over it. I sat there and I did the arithmetic the way I always do, the way everyday algebra taught a generation of children to do. Because numbers do not lie, and they do not flatter. 3 cards maxed. The equity line dry. $600,000 vanished into the sea. and a lifestyle, the columns and the leases and the second Sundays that cost more every month than it took in. My son was not a little behind. He was underwater and sinking, and the weight pulling him down was pride.
Because a man who could have sold the columns and rented an apartment and started again had instead gone looking for one more source of cash he could reach without admitting to the world that he had failed.
And there was only one such source. An old man in a small house, believed to be poor, believed to be fading, who could be quietly declared unfit, whose modest little life could be liquidated by a caring son with a doctor wife and a sympathetic judge, before the neighbors ever learned the columns were mortgaged twice. I understood it all, now sitting in his chair. It was not even hatred. I almost wished it had been hatred, because hatred at least takes you seriously. This was worse. To Cairo, I was not a father he despised. I was an asset he had overlooked. A line item he had forgotten was on the books, and remembered only when the other lines went red. I took out my phone, and I photographed all of it. The Coastal Ridge Agreement, the letter that killed it, the statements, the notices, the whole architecture of a man's ruin, page by page, in the flat gray Sunday light coming through his expensive blinds. And then, underneath the failed development folder, I found one more document, and when I saw the top of it, I went very still. It was a mortgage, a hard money loan, the kind of loan a desperate man takes at brutal interest from people who do not ask many questions. 90 days, a number with 6 figures, and on the line for the collateral, the property pledged against the loan, was an address. But it was not the address of the house I was sitting in. I knew that address the way I know my own name. I had known it for 45 years. I had painted its shutters and buried my wife from it. It was mine. I made myself read the mortgage slowly, though every instinct told me to run. A man who runs from a document leaves without understanding it, and I had not come this far to understand only half. The loan was for $400,000. The lender was a company called Sable Point Capital, one of those names that sounds like a yacht club and behaves like a loan shark. The term was 90 days. The interest was the kind that doubles a debt while a man sleeps, and the collateral pledged in full was the house on Auburn Avenue, my house. The house that was not Cairo's to pledge had never been his, would not be his until I was in the ground, and even then, only if I chose, which meant one of two things. Either my son had borrowed against property he did not own, which is fraud, plain and old and prosecutable, or he had made himself the owner first. I turned to the last page, to the exhibit stapled behind the loan, and there it was, a quit-claim deed. A single sheet of paper by which the owner of a property signs it over to someone else. It was dated 7 months ago. It transferred the house on Auburn Avenue from Stephen Hurst to Cairo Hurst. And at the bottom, on the line that said grantor, was my signature. Except that it was not my signature. It was close. He had studied it the way a boy studies the thing he means to counterfeit, and to a stranger, it would pass. But I have signed my name perhaps 1,000,000 times in 72 years on report cards and mortgage papers and the flyleaf of every book I ever gave away. And I know the truth of it the way I know my own heartbeat. The S was wrong. He had never once in his life seen how the S begins low and to the left, because that is a thing you feel in your own hand and cannot see from across a table. He had forged his father's name to steal his father's house, to feed it to a loan shark, to cover a hole in the ground by the sea. I photographed the deed. I photographed the loan. I photographed the notice clipped to the front of it from Sable Point Capital, informing Mr. Cairo Hurst that his 90 days had lapsed, that the debt was now in default, and that the lender would shortly begin proceedings to take possession of the collateral. The collateral. My home. They meant to foreclose on the house where I was at that very hour supposed to be losing my mind. Now the whole grim machine stood revealed to me, every gear of it. He had forged the deed months ago. He had borrowed against my house and lost that too. Now the shark was circling, and the only way to keep me from discovering the fraud pinned to my own front door was to make sure I was declared unfit and shut away before the foreclosure notice ever arrived, so that a confused old ward of the state with no lawyer and no phone could be moved to Green Meadows, while the paperwork erased him quietly from his own life. It was, I will admit, well built, My son had inherited more of my mind than either of us ever knew. He had simply used it to dig instead of to build. And then I heard the garage door, the low mechanical grind of it rising through the house, and under it, the sound of a car engine close home. They were back, hours early. Some fight in the car, some changed plan. It did not matter. What mattered was that I was sitting in my son's chair with his crimes spread across his desk and his phone photographs still warm in my hand. I did not panic. I effaced a room of 200 and had to look calm while my own life fell apart. And the body remembers what the practice taught it. I squared every folder to the angle I had found it. I slid the mortgage back beneath the Coastal Ridge file, exactly the failed development on top, the way it had been. I pushed the chair to the precise distance from the desk. I pocketed my phone, and I walked out of the office and down the hall, not fast, and I was standing in the front room, looking at nothing, my face already soft and vague. When the door from the garage opened and Valentina came through it, she stopped when she saw me. Her eyes went sharp for just a moment. The doctors quick scanned the calculation. "Dad, what are you doing here?" I looked at her, and I let confusion drift across my face like a cloud across a field. "I got a ride," I said slowly. "I thought, was there not a dinner today? I thought you asked me to come for dinner." The sharpness in her face melted into something worse, something satisfied. "There was no dinner, Dad. There's no dinner today." She glanced past me down the hall toward the office, and I made myself not follow her eyes. And after a moment, she looked back at me, and I saw that she had decided what she was seeing. Not an intruder, a confused old man who had wandered to the wrong house on the wrong day, expecting a meal that did not exist. "Oh," I said, "I'm sorry, I must have." I trailed off and let my hands open, helpless. "It's all right," she said, and I heard her filing it, another line for the affidavit. "Wandered to our home under a false belief, further evidence of decline. Let me drive you back." And so my enemy drove me home, pleased with the newest proof of my madness, never once suspecting that in my coat pocket, against my heart, sat the photographs that would one day bury her. That night I sent Patrick everything. The photographs of the failed development, the maxed cards, the hard money loan, and the forged deed with the wrong S at the bottom of my own name. I sent them without a word of explanation, because Patrick has been reading documents for 40 years and needs no help seeing what is in front of him. He called me back at 1 in the morning. I was awake. I had not really slept since the parking lot, and I had stopped pretending I would. "Stephen," he said, and his voice was strange, tight, wound up like a man holding something too big to set down. "Are you sitting?" "I'm sitting. I've spent the last 3 hours in the county records," he said. "The forged deed, that's a felony. We both know that. We can end him with that alone, whenever we choose. But that's not why I'm calling you at 1 in the morning. I went looking after I saw it. I wanted to understand the whole board before I called you. And Stephen, I have to ask you something, and I need you to think before you answer. The house Cairo and Valentina live in, the big one with the columns, do you know who owns it?" "They own it," I said. "Or the bank does. Cairo bought it, 15 years ago, when Nasir was born?" "No," Patrick said. "He did not." I said nothing. I have learned in a long life that when a careful man tells you to sit down and then contradicts a thing you have believed for 15 years, the wise move is silence. 15 years ago, Patrick said, when they were about to lose their apartment, when Cairo's first business had just gone under and Valentina was pregnant and they had nowhere to go, somebody bought that house, bought it outright, cash, and then put it into a holding company so the young couple could live in it and never know it wasn't theirs. The deed has never been in Cairo's name, not for one single day. It sits to this hour in an entity called Auburn Holdings. The room went very quiet around me. The old clock ticked. Somewhere under the floor of my memory, a door I had shut and forgotten swung slowly open. "Auburn Holdings," I said. "You formed it," Patrick said gently, 22 years ago. "I drew the papers myself, Stephen. I've forgotten it too. God help me, it was so long ago. And you never spoke of it. You're the sole member. You have been the whole time." And then I remembered. I remembered Adelie at this kitchen table 15 years ago, her hand over mine, both of us listening to our son on the phone, trying to sound like he was not crying, trying to sound like a man who had not just failed and did not have a place to bring his pregnant wife home to. I remembered Adelie saying, "We cannot give him money, Stephen. He will burn through money and hate us for watching." And I remembered what we did instead. We bought the house, quietly, through the company, and we told him we had a friend, a landlord, who would rent it to them cheap while they got back on their feet. $1 a year, though, we never told him that part. We let him believe he was a tenant of some kind stranger's mercy, because we knew his pride could accept a stranger's mercy when it could not accept his father's. And then the years passed, and he prospered, or seemed to, and we never corrected it because to correct it would have been to take away the thing he was proudest of, the belief that he had climbed there himself. We let him keep his dignity. We paid for his dignity every month for 15 years and never sent a bill and never said a word.
He forgot it wasn't his, I said slowly. My God, Patrick, he forgot it was never his. He's been strutting under those columns for 15 years, throwing his parties, shaking his hands in those framed photographs. And somewhere in all that performing, he simply stopped remembering that his own father owns the ground he stands on. A man can talk himself into anything if he says it long enough and no one corrects him. We did not correct him. We loved him too much to correct him. And love that never tells the truth curdles in the end into exactly this. They both forgot Patrick said. Which means Stephen and I want you to hear this clearly, that your son and his wife are trying to have you declared incompetent and evicted from your home. And they are doing it from inside a house that belongs entirely to you. They are at this moment your tenants, nothing more. Tenants who pay $1 a year and do not even know it. Tenants who have committed fraud against the very landlord they are trying to lock away. I sat in the dark of Adelie's kitchen, and I looked at her photograph on the mantel through the doorway her smile caught forever, and I understood at last the full and perfect shape of what my child had built. He had dug a pit for his father to fall into, and he had dug it in his father's own field, standing on his father's own land, holding a shovel his father had paid for. They are trying to put the landlord out on the street, I said quietly, from inside the landlord's own house. Yes, said Patrick. Then I think I said, and for the first time in many weeks I felt something almost like peace. It is time the landlord came to inspect his property. After Patrick hung up, I did not go to bed. I sat in Adelie's kitchen with her photograph, watching me from the next room, and I let myself go all the way back 15 years to the night we decided to save a son who would one day try to bury us. It was a February night, cold even for Atlanta. The phone rang after 10, which in those years was never good news. And it was Cairo. He was 26 then. His first company, a thing he had started with more confidence than capital, had collapsed that week. And he owed people, and the lease on their apartment was up. And Valentina was 7 months along with the baby that would become the boy who saved my life in a parking lot. My son was trying on that phone to ask his father for help without using any of the words that would have meant asking. I could hear Valentina crying somewhere behind him. I could hear my son's pride fighting his fear and losing and hating that it was losing. I put my hand over the phone and I looked at Adelie. And she had already understood the whole thing the way she understood everything before I did. Do not offer him money, she said quietly. I know you want to. Do not. If you hand that boy a check, he will spend it and resent you for having had it to give. He will feel like a child taking an allowance, and a man who feels like a child around his father never becomes a man at all. There has to be another way. We sat up until 2 in the morning at that same table. And by the time the coffee was cold, we had built it. We would not give him money. We would give him a floor to stand on and let him believe he had found it himself. I would buy a house, a good one, a real one, the kind of house a young man on his way up might plausibly find a landlord willing to rent to him cheap. I would bury my name in a company so that no thread led back to me. And I would invent a landlord, a private party, an out-of-town owner represented by a management company that was really just Patrick, who wanted a stable family in the house and would take almost nothing in rent to have it cared for. We told Cairo the next week. I watched my son's face on the phone, the relief, and then the suspicion, and then the careful, prideful acceptance,
and I heard him decide to believe that he had gotten lucky, that a generous stranger had appeared at his lowest hour, and I let him have it. Nasir was born in that house 2 months later in the spring, and I held him in the front room under a ceiling I had paid for, and my son had no idea was mine, and I thought, this is what a father is for, to build a floor so quietly that the child never even feels it holding him up. I wanted him to have it. $1 a year, though the paper said a figure high enough to sound real, and I quietly covered the difference, the taxes, the insurance, the roof when it needed replacing, all of it for 15 years through a company he thought belonged to a man he had never met. I did it out of love. I want to be honest about that, sitting here in the dark all these years later, because it would be easier now to pretend I did it wisely and it went wrong through no fault of mine. That is not the truth. I did it out of love, and I did it out of fear, and the two were braided together so tightly I could never have told you where one ended. I was afraid of my son's pride. I was afraid that if I helped him openly, he would pull away from me, and I could not bear to lose him. So I helped him in secret and let him think he owed me nothing. I thought I was protecting his dignity. I see now I was also protecting myself from the risk of being needed too plainly, from the vulnerability of being thanked. And Adley, who is wiser than me in all things, said one more thing that night, and I had forgotten it until Patrick's call brought it back whole. She said, "Stephen, one day we may have to tell him the truth of this. And if that day comes, it will be because something has gone wrong in him, and the truth will not be a gift anymore. It will be a reckoning. Be ready for that day." I had smiled at her and said it would never come. Our boy had a good heart. He only needed a floor to stand on. Now I sat in her kitchen 15 years later, and the floor I had bought him had become the stage on which he was performing my destruction. And the son whose dignity I had spent a fortune to protect was forging my name to sell the very house I still lived in. And I heard my wife's voice across all those years, gentle and unsurprised. "The truth will not be a gift anymore," she had said. "It will be a reckoning." I looked at her photograph, at the smile that had known this was coming before I did. "All right, Adley," I said softly into the empty house. "You told me to be ready. I'm ready." The next morning I called Patrick to his office and told him to clear the day, because I had decided how this would end, and it would take precision to build. A demolition done right is only ever an act of precision. You do not swing wildly at a rotten structure. You study where the weight is carried, and you place your charges there. And then a thing that took years to raise comes down in seconds and lands exactly where you meant it to. I gave him 3 orders. I want you to understand each one, because together they were the whole design. The first, I said, is the trust, the Adley trust. I want you to move to protect it completely and to confirm in writing that neither Cairo nor Valentina has any claim on it, any access to it, any knowledge of it that could be used. If this goes the way these things can go, if for one single day they get a temporary order, I will not have them reaching that money while I fight to breathe. Wall it off. Today. Done, Patrick said. It's already largely shielded by the structure, but I'll harden it and document it by end of business. I'll add language that makes it unreachable by any conservator, so that even a temporary order can't touch $1 of it. The second, I said, is Sable Point Capital, the loan sharks holding the note on my house. The $400,000 Cairo borrowed against a property that was never his to pledge. I want to buy that note. The line was quiet a moment. You want to buy your son's debt. I want to buy the note secured against my house, I said. Sable Point does not care who pays them. They are not sentimental people. Call them today and offer to purchase the note at face value, cash, immediate. The moment I hold that paper, I am the lien holder. I am the one they forged the deed to satisfy, and every crime Cairo committed to feed that loan becomes a crime committed directly against the man who now owns it. I do not want the shark circling my house. I want to become the water. Let my son learn what it means to owe a debt to the very father he tried to erase. I heard Patrick write it down. And the third? The third is the hardest. I said, and it is the one I need you to build most carefully. I want the whole case reversed and held ready to spring, but not fired. Not yet. Prepare everything. The petition to establish my capacity. The neutral physician hours on standby to examine me the instant we move. The criminal referrals, the forged deed, the fraud against Sable Point, the elder abuse, the eviction papers for Auburn Holdings against its tenants, and the recordings, all of them indexed.
Timestamped, ready to play. I want every charge loaded and every document signed and sitting in a drawer in your office. And then I want us to do nothing.
Nothing, Patrick repeated.
Because they are going to hold their evaluation soon, I said. Valentina told Cairo the file was almost thick enough. When they believe it is ready, they will bring their doctor to my house and they will run their examination. And they will expect to walk out with the last piece they need. I want them to walk in believing they have already won. I want them relaxed, confident, careless. I want them to perform the whole thing one final time on camera in front of a doctor in my house.
With their own mouths. And at the moment they reach for the prize, I will take the floor.
You're going to let them hold the evaluation, Patrick said slowly.
The very thing that could sink you. You're going to invite the loaded gun into your own living room.
A trap that is never sprung catches nothing, I said. I have spent weeks letting them build. I am not going to stop them 1 inch short of the edge. I am going to let them step all the way to it, and then I am going to be the ground that isn't there.
Stephen, he said, and there was the old fear in it, the friend under the lawyer. If anything goes wrong in that room, if that doctor signs before we can respond, you could be in a facility by nightfall. This is the most dangerous possible version of this.
It is also the only one that ends it, I said. Anything less, and they simply wait and try again. And I spend whatever years I have left flinching at every knock on the door. No, I will not live like that. I have chosen. Load everything, hold everything, and when they call to schedule their little examination, you tell me, and we let them come.
He was silent a long moment. I could picture him at his desk, the man who had drawn up Auburn Holdings 22 years ago, who had buried Adelie beside me, weighing his oldest friend's life against his lawyer's caution. Then he said, "All right. God help me, all right. I'll have it all ready inside the week. But I'm putting my own physician on call, and if that room turns wrong, I don't wait for your signal. I come through the door."
Agreed, I said. I would not have asked you to promise less.
And Stephen, he said, when it's built, when it's all sitting in that drawer, waiting, what do we call it? Because I'll need a file name.
I looked out the window at the gray morning at the ordinary street where an ordinary old man was supposed to be quietly losing his mind, and I thought about a career spent writing the truth down where it could not be argued with.
"Call it final exam," I said, and hung up. They saved their most dangerous performance for last, and I nearly did not survive the watching of it. It was a Tuesday evening, 4 days after I named the file. Cairo and Valentina came together unannounced, which was itself a signal because their visits had always been arranged, so there would be a reason on record. This time there was no plate, no pretense of supper. Valentina went straight through to the kitchen, while Cairo kept me talking in the front room, his hand on my shoulder, his voice too warm, asking about my week. And I understood that the hand on my shoulder was there to keep me in my chair and my eyes off the kitchen doorway. I let him hold me there. But I have watched 100 students try to keep my attention off the thing they did not want me to see, and the trick is always the same, and it always fails against a man who knows it. Past Cairo's shoulder in the dark glass of the front window, I could see the kitchen reflected. And in that reflection, I watched my daughter-in-law, the doctor, the healer, go to my stove and turn a burner knob and not light. I heard the small hiss begin. She had opened the gas and left it unlit, and then she came back into the front room smiling and sat down and began to talk about the weather, while the air in my kitchen filled slow and invisible with the thing that kills you without a sound. Now understand what they were doing, because it is worse than it first appears. They were not only building the record, they were building the emergency. A confused old man who leaves the gas on is a danger to himself, yes, an entry in a file. But a confused old man who nearly gasses himself and his own family, who has to be pulled from a filling house by his frightened, heroic son, that is not a file entry. That is a 911 call. That is first responders and a report and a night in a hospital and a doctor at the bedside recommending for everyone's safety an immediate protective placement. They were not padding the affidavit anymore. They were manufacturing the crisis that would let them skip the slow road entirely and take me that very night.
And they were willing to fill a house with gas with all three of us in it, and their own son perhaps arriving later to do it. I could have stood up. I could have dropped the mask, walked to the kitchen, shut off the gas, and said, I know. Part of me, the part that could smell it now, wanted exactly that. But I had learned the shape of these people by then, and I knew that if I exposed myself 1 week early over a stove, they would deny it, revise it, call it my confusion, and vanish to plan again. So I did the hardest thing I have ever done in my own home. I sat in the rising smell of my own death, and I trusted the small dark lens in the radio grill 8 feet away, which was at that moment recording a licensed physician opening a gas line in an occupied house and returning to make conversation about the weather. I let it run perhaps 90 seconds. Then I let my nose wrinkle, slow the way a foggy old man might finally notice something, and I said mildly, "Do you smell gas?" The reaction was a performance in itself. Valentina was up at once, all alarm. "Oh my God, Dad, the stove! Dad, did you leave the stove on again?" And Cairo rushing to the kitchen, and the window thrown open, and the two of them filling the air now with words instead of gas. Building the story out loud even as they aired the room. "You left it on again, Dad. This is exactly what we've been afraid of. You could have killed us all. You cannot keep living here alone. You see that now, don't you? You have to see that now." I let them say it. I put my hand to my chest and I sat down heavily, and I let them believe the fright had landed on me and not the fury. And then Valentina crouched in front of me and took my hand and delivered the line the whole evening had been built to deliver. "Dad," she said gently, "we can't wait any longer. This isn't safe. I'm going to have a colleague come by, a doctor, a friend of mine, Brett Stokes, just to talk to you, just to make sure you're all right. Friday morning, we'll all be here, and after that, we're going to get you somewhere they can take care of you." Friday morning. There it was, the date. The final exam scheduled at last in my own living room, by the very people who were about to fail it. I let my eyes fill and my voice tremble, and I said, "All right, whatever you think is best." "Good, Dad," Valentina murmured, patting my hand. "That's good." They left me with the windows open and the cold pouring in. I sat in my coat at the kitchen table until the gas was gone and the house was clean and quiet again. And my hands, I noticed, were perfectly steady. Steadier than they had been in weeks, the way a man's hands go still once he has finally seen the whole of the thing he is up against. Then I took out my phone and I saved the file, and I did not name this one a lesson. I named it Exhibit A. "Friday," I said to the empty kitchen. "All right, Friday we hold class." I had 3 days before Friday, and I spent the first of them the way I had spent 10,000 evenings of my working life. At the kitchen table under a good lamp, putting a record in order. I connected the cameras to my old laptop, and I pulled down every file, weeks of them, and I began to build the thing that would end this. Not a pile of clips, a case. A teacher learns early that evidence proves nothing if it is only true. It must also be arranged so that a person seeing it for the first time arrives at the truth in the right order and cannot escape it. I had graded enough appeals to know that the strongest argument is the one that lets the reader believe he discovered it himself. So I built a timeline. I made a column for the date, a column for what my son and his wife had done, and a column, the important one, for what they had said it meant. And then beside it, I built a second document, because Patrick had managed to obtain through the discovery. He had quietly begun a copy of the affidavit Valentina had been assembling. Her clinical record. The file that was almost thick enough. I laid her lies beside my footage, line by line. And I want to tell you, it was the coldest reading of my life. Where her record said, March 12th, patient found car keys in refrigerator. No memory of placing them. Severe disorientation. My footage showed her own hand placing those keys in the butter compartment 40 minutes before Miranda was called across the street. Where her record said, patient exhibits resting hand tremor. My footage showed a man walking 6 blocks and threading a needle and one single tremor produced on purpose on the day I chose to hand it to her. Where her record said, April 2nd patient left gas burner open, endangering household unaware of the hazard.
My footage showed a licensed physician crossing my kitchen and opening that burner with her own hand while her husband held me in my chair. Every entry in her file had a twin in my footage, and the twin told the opposite story. She had written a novel about a dying mind, and I had the photographs of her writing it. Point for point, her fiction and my facts standing in 2 columns that any judge on earth could read in 5 minutes and never unsee. I worked until the windows went black and then gray again. And when I was done, I had something I had not had at the start of all this. I had certainty I could hand to another person. Up to now, the truth had lived only in me, and a truth that lives in one old man is a fragile thing, easily called confusion, easily buried. Now it lived on a drive, time-stamped, indexed, cross-referenced to her own signed lies. It had left my body. It could not be gaslit anymore. I sent a copy to Patrick and kept 2 more in places they would never think to look, because a man who has watched his family forge his name does not keep only 1 copy of anything ever again. 1 went into a safe deposit box downtown. 1 went to a retired colleague 3 states away, a woman I had trusted with harder things than this, with a sealed letter of instruction to open it only if I could not be reached. I was not being dramatic. I had learned over these weeks exactly how far these 2 would go, and I would not stake the only proof of my sanity on a single hard drive under 1 roof. Then late on that second night, I did the thing I had been putting off. I made myself watch it all the way through, start to finish. Not as a builder of a case, but simply as a father. I watched my son lay his faults Monday in front of me with that terrible gentleness. I watched Valentina pass over Adelie's wedding glasses for a child's plastic cup. I watched the keys, the gas, the whole long, patient campaign to convince the world, and very nearly me, that I was disappearing. And somewhere in the middle of it, I put my head down on the table in the dark, next to the machine that held the proof, and I grieved. Not for myself. I was going to be fine. I grieved for the son I thought I had raised, who did not exist and perhaps never had, and for the boy he used to be, who had once fallen asleep on my chest in a house I would later buy back for him in secret. I let myself mourn that child, because after Friday, there would be no time for mourning, only for judgment. And a man should not pass sentence with grief still unwept in him. It clouds the hand. When morning came, I was hollowed out and clear. The way you are after a long weeping finally stops. I washed my face. I made coffee in a real cup, my own, and drank it looking at Adelie on the mantel. 2 days, I told her. The record's complete. Every lie has its answer, every entry its twin. It balances to the penny the way you always taught me a true account must. The house was quiet. The trap was built, and the proof was sealed, and the date was set. All that remained was to let them walk in on Friday, confident and smiling, and hold for them the last examination they would ever fail. I rinsed my cup, set it in the rack, and went to get my good suit down from the closet. It was time to decide what a man wears to the end of a lie. Nasir called me Wednesday night, and I knew from the first word that they had finally reached for him too. "Grandpa," he said, and his voice was wrong too. Careful, the voice of a boy speaking where he might be overheard. "Can you talk?" "I can always talk to you," I said. "Are you alone?" "I'm in my room. They think I'm doing homework." A breath. "Grandpa, they sat me down tonight, Mom and Dad. They said Friday there's a doctor coming to see you. And they said—" He stopped. When I did not fill the silence, he made himself go on. "They said the doctor's going to ask me questions. About you. And they told me what to say. They practiced it with me. They want me to tell him you don't know what day it is. That you called me by the wrong name. That you left the stove on, and I was scared." He was quiet. "None of it's true, Grandpa. They wrote me a script. My own parents wrote me a script to say about you, and they made me say it back until I had it right." I closed my eyes. So this was the last brick. Not a neighbor this time, not a plastic cup. Their own son, 16 years old, turned into a witness against the grandfather he loved. If Nasir sat in that room Friday and recited their lines, it would be the most devastating testimony of all, because a boy does not lie about the grandfather he adores. and everyone in that room would know it and believe him. And it would be the thing that sank me.
They had found the one witness whose word no one would doubt, and they had not once considered what it would cost the boy to give it. "What did you tell them?" I asked.
I said, "Okay," he whispered. I said, "Okay, Grandpa," because I was scared and I didn't know what else to do, and now I feel like I'm going to be sick. He was crying now, quietly, the way a boy cries when he is trying not to be heard through a bedroom wall. "I don't want to lie about you, but if I don't, they'll know I told you and I don't. I don't know what happens to me then."
"Listen to me," I said, and I put every year of the classroom into my voice, the steadiness that had talked frightened children off of 100 ledges. "You are not going to have to lie, and you are not going to have to defy them to their faces either. There is a third road, and I am going to show it to you, and it is going to be all right. Do you trust me?" "Yes." "Then here is what is going to happen Friday," I said. "You are going to be there. You are going to sit where they put you. And when the doctor asks you his questions, you are going to tell the exact truth, every word of it, the way you just told me. Not their script, the truth. Can you do that?"
"But they'll be right there," he said. "They'll hear me."
"Yes," I said. "They will. And that is the point, son.
I need you to understand something, and then I need you to stop being afraid, because your grandfather has already taken care of everything else. Friday is not going to go the way they think it will. By the time the doctor asks you a single question, the room will already have changed. You will not be testifying against me, and you will not be defying them alone in the dark. You will simply be one honest voice in a room where the truth has already walked in the front door. All you have to do is not lie. That is the only thing I will ever ask of you. Can you carry that?" There was a long silence, and then my grandson said in a voice that had steadied, that had found something to stand on, "Yes, I can carry that."
"Good," I said.
"Then do one more thing for me between now and Friday. Be ordinary. Do your homework. Let them think you're going to say their lines. Give them nothing to worry about. And Nasir, whatever you see happen in that room on Friday, however it turns, you keep your eyes on me, and you tell the truth when you are asked, and you let me handle the rest. Your only job is to be the honest man I raised you to be. Everything else is mine to carry."
"Okay, Grandpa," he said. And then, "Smaller Grandpa, are they going to jail?" I looked at Adelie's photograph across the room, and I chose my words the way I would choose them for any child asking a question too heavy for his years.
"What happens to your mother and father," I said gently, "is going to be the result of things they chose long before you or I ever walked into that room. It was never going to be you who did that to them. Do you understand me? Whatever comes their harvest is their own. You did not plant it. You will never have planted it." He said he understood. I do not know if he did not fully, not yet. But he stopped crying, and before he hung up, he said, "I love you, Grandpa," in the plain, unguarded way children say it before the world teaches them to be careful. And I sat holding the silent phone for a long while after. 2 days, one honest boy, and the room full of liars who did not know they had just handed me my final witness. Friday came gray and cold the way I had somehow known it would. I did not wear the good suit. I had taken it down 2 days before and looked at it and understood that it was for later, for the after. For the morning itself, I put on the frayed cardigan they knew the slacks a little too short, the costume of the man they had spent weeks inventing. I wanted them comfortable. I wanted them to walk in and see exactly what they expected, right up until the floor was gone. They arrived together at 9, and there were 4 of them. Cairo in a jacket that cost too much. Valentina in her doctor's calm, a leather folder under her arm. Nasir pale, keeping his eyes down, playing his part as I had told him to. And a 4th man I had not met, though I knew him at once. Brett Stokes. 50s expensive glasses. The soft, careful hands of a man who signs things for money. He had the eyes of an appraiser, not a physician. He looked at me the way you look at a house you are about to have condemned. "Mr. Hurst," he said, extending one of those soft hands. "I'm Dr. Stokes, a friend of Valentina's. I hope you don't mind if we just talk a little this morning." I took his hand and let mine tremble in it. "Any friend of my family," I said, and let the sentence wander off into nothing, and saw the small, satisfied note pass between him and Valentina. The old man could not even finish a thought. Good. Let them write it down. They arranged the room the way people arrange a trial. Stokes took the armchair, my armchair, and set a notebook on his knee. Valentina sat close, my chart in her lap, ready to translate my whole life into symptoms. Cairo stood by the mantel under the photograph of his mother, too restless to sit. And I noticed he would not look up at her picture, not once the whole morning. And Nasir they placed on the sofa, front and center, the witness, the loaded weapon they intended to fire last. My grandson kept his eyes on his own hands, and only once, when he thought no one watched, did he lift them to me, and I gave him the smallest nod, and he looked down again and held on. Stokes began gently, the way they always do. Do you know what day it is, Mr. Hurst? Do you know why your family is worried? I gave him a little of what he came for. I fumbled the date. I let a word slip away from me mid-sentence and reached for it and failed. I watched him make his marks, watched Valentina nod along sorrowfully, watched Cairo's shoulders ease as he began to believe it was going to be easy after all. For 20 minutes, I let them have their examination. I let them build one last time the whole cathedral of my incompetence, brick by patient brick, because I wanted every one of them fully inside it when it came down. A wise man does not interrupt his enemy while the enemy is finishing the rope. He waits, and he lets the knot be tied, and he makes certain the hands that tied it are the ones caught holding it. Valentina offered her clinical observations in that smooth, warm voice.
Cairo supplied the touching anecdotes, the false Mondays, the wandering. Stokes wrote and nodded and at last set down his pen with the quiet finality of a man reaching a conclusion he had been paid to reach.
Well, he said, folding his hands, I think the picture is fairly clear. Given what I'm seeing today and Dr. Norris's thorough documentation, I'm comfortable that a recommendation for immediate protective placement is more than justified. He looked at Cairo. I can sign the evaluation this morning. You can begin the process today.
Cairo exhaled. Valentina's hand drifted toward the leather folder, toward the papers waiting inside it. They had done it. In their minds, in that instant, they had won. I watched the victory settle over the room like warmth from a fire, watched them relax into it, watched them begin already to spend it. It was exactly the moment I had waited weeks for, the moment they believed it was over. Before you sign anything, doctor, I said. I did not fumble the words. I did not tremble. I said it in the voice I had used for 36 years at the front of a room. The voice that stops 200 restless students mid-motion without ever rising. And the effect in that small room was the same as it had ever been in any classroom. Everything stopped. Stokes's pen halted above the page. Valentina's hand froze on the folder. Cairo turned from the mantel, and I watched the first cold thread of doubt cross my son's face. Because he had not heard that voice, that particular voice, since he was a boy. And some animal part of him remembered what it meant. I sat up straight in the frayed cardigan. I let the fog fall off my face like a dropped mask, and I looked at each of them in turn, slowly, the way you look at a class that thinks the test is over and is about to learn it has not yet begun. Since we're all gathered, I said, and my hand moved to the small remote resting beside me on the arm of the chair. And there's a physician present to witness it. I'd like to show everyone a few things I've recorded. For the record, for the diagnosis. And I pressed the button, and the television came on. The first image that filled the screen was my own kitchen, in clear color, the date and time burning white in the corner. And in it, Valentina. Alone. Reaching into my refrigerator and setting my car keys carefully into the butter compartment, then glancing over her shoulder, then walking away. 40 minutes, the timestamp would show, before she called Miranda across the street to witness the tragedy of an old man who hid his keys in the cold. No one in the room breathed. I did not narrate it. A good teacher never explains what the evidence already says. I simply let it play, and I watched their faces instead of the screen, because their faces were the real show. The clip changed. My kitchen again, another day. Valentina at the cabinet, passing over Adelie's wedding crystal, taking down a red plastic child's cup she lifted from her own handbag and placed on my shelf. Setting the stage. The clip changed again. Cairo leaning over me in my chair,
his voice coming clear through the television speakers, that gentle poison. "You just forget sometimes, Dad. It's okay." The false Monday laid down like a paving stone. Valentina's face had gone the color of ash. Her hand came off the leather folder as if it had grown hot. Cairo had gone completely still by the mantel, the restlessness drained out of him, and he wore the expression of a man who has just heard a sound in the dark that he prayed he would never hear. "Turn it off," she said. Her voice was not smooth now. "Stephen, turn it off." I did not turn it off. The screen changed once more, and this was the one I had built the whole morning around, and I saw Brett Stokes lean forward before he could stop himself, because even a bot man has a line, and I was about to walk his own client across it right in front of him. My kitchen, Tuesday evening 4 days ago. Cairo holding me in the front room, his hand on my shoulder, and Valentina in full color, with sound crossing to my stove, taking the burner knob in her fingers and turning on the gas without lighting it, then walking back to sit down and speak of the weather, while the room filled with the thing that kills without a sound. The recording was merciless. It showed her check the clock. It showed her wait. It showed a licensed physician sworn to do no harm, deliberately filling an occupied house with gas to manufacture a crisis with her own husband, and later her own son meant to be inside it. Brett Stokes stood up. He stood the way a man stands when the floor of his own career has just tilted under him. He looked at the screen and then at Valentina, and I watched the entire calculation run across his soft appraiser's face. He had come here to sign a routine evaluation for a colleague, a favor for a fee, a confused old man, nothing to it. He had not come to attach his name and his license to a video of that same colleague opening a gas line in an occupied home. There was money in the first thing. There was prison in the second. "I'm not signing anything," Stokes said. His voice had gone high and fast. "Valentina, what is this? What in God's name is this? You told me this was a straightforward decline. You did not tell me any of this. I was never here." He was gathering his notebook, his coat, his dignity, dropping half of it in his haste. "I withdraw from this matter entirely. I have seen nothing, I will sign nothing, and if either of you speaks my name in connection with this again, you'll be speaking it to my attorney." And he was gone. The front door opened on the cold gray morning and slammed, and his car started in the driveway before anyone in the room had found a word, and the loaded weapon they had meant to fire at me, the doctor's signature, walked out of my house and drove away, and left them holding nothing but each other. I pressed the button and the screen went dark and the room was very quiet. Cairo had not moved from the mantel. He was staring at the black television as though it might come back to life and accuse him further. Valentina sat rigid, her folder useless in her lap, her clinical calm stripped clean off her face, and under it at last I could see the thing that had been driving all of it, which was not strength and had never been strength. It was fear, the plain animal fear of people who owed more than they could pay and had gambled their souls to cover it and just watched the last card turn against them. And on the sofa my grandson lifted his head. Nasir looked at the dark screen, and then at his parents, and then at me. And for the first time in weeks, the fear went out of the boy's eyes, because he understood all at once that he had not been asked to destroy anyone. The truth had walked in the front door exactly as I had promised him, and all he had ever had to do was not lie, and now he would not even have to speak. "Grandpa," he said softly into the silence. "Not yet, son," I said gently, not taking my eyes off his parents. "In a minute. Right now your mother and father and I are going to have a conversation we should have had a long time ago." I turned to face them fully. "There is more," I said. "Sit down, both of you. Class isn't over." As if he had been waiting for the words, and he had because he had been parked at the curb since 8:30, Patrick knocked twice and let himself in. He came into the room in a charcoal suit with a leather case in his hand, and the sight of him changed the air completely. Cairo and Valentina had been braced for an old man they could still argue with, still spin, still call confused. They were not braced for a lawyer. Valentina came half out of her seat. "Who are you?" she said. "Patrick Turner," he said, pleasantly, setting his case on the coffee table and unclasping it. "I represent Mr. Stephen Hurst, and I represent Auburn Holdings. You'll want to sit back down, Dr. Norris. The next part concerns you very directly." He laid the first document on the table and turned it to face them. "This," Patrick said, "is the deed to the house you live in, the one with the columns. I want to draw your attention to the owner of record, which is and has been for 22 years an entity called Auburn Holdings. And I want to introduce you to the sole member of Auburn Holdings, since you appear never to have met him." He gestured to me. The silence that followed was the deepest I have ever heard in that little room. I watched it reach Cairo, last, watched it climb his face slowly, the way water climbs a wall. He looked at the deed, he looked at me, his mouth opened. "You?" he said. "You own our house?" "I have owned it since before Nazir was born," I said quietly. "I bought it the winter your first company failed, when you and Valentina had nowhere to bring a baby home to. Your mother and I bought it, and we hid our names, and we invented a kind stranger who would rent it to you for almost nothing, because we knew your pride could take a stranger's charity when it could not take your father's. You have lived for 15 years in my house. Rent $1 a year. I paid the taxes. I paid for the roof over your son's head. And you never knew because we loved you too much to let you know." Cairo's legs seemed to give beneath him. He did not sit so much as fold down onto the hearth beneath his mother's photograph, staring at nothing. 15 years of parties under those columns. 15 years of shaking hands and hosting men he wanted to impress, of believing he had climbed there on his own, of being ashamed of the small father in the 15-year-old suit. And all of it, every square foot of it, had been standing on ground his father bought him and never mentioned. I watched that knowledge break over him, and for one moment, God help me, I pitied my son more than I have ever pitied anyone. Patrick laid down the second document, and this, he said, is a promissory note. $400,000, originally held by Sable Point Capital, secured by a fraudulent deed transferring the property at Auburn Avenue, Mr. Hurst's residence, into Cairo Hurst's name. A deed bearing a forged signature. As of Wednesday, that note was purchased in full by my client. Which means, Mr. Hurst, that the debt you took out by forging your father's name is now owed directly to your father. He holds the note, he holds the forged deed, and he holds, at his sole discretion, the decision whether that forgery becomes a matter for the district attorney. Valentina found her voice, and it was the wrong voice, the fighting one, the one that had gotten them this far. "You can't prove intent," she said. "You can't prove that anything on that video was there. Our explanations, a burner can be bumped, keys get misplaced. You are twisting, ordinary." Dr. Norris Patrick said without heat, "There is time-stamped video of you opening a gas line in an occupied dwelling and sitting down to wait. There is a falsified medical affidavit under your signature, which I have cross-referenced line by line against recordings that contradict every entry. There is a forged real estate instrument. Any one of these ends your license. Together, they are 5 to 15 years. I would stop talking now if I were you. And I say that as the only person in this room presently giving you good advice." And she stopped. At last the smooth, clever voice ran dry, and Valentina Norris sat in my living room with nothing left to say, because there was nothing left that would help her. And some part of her had finally understood it. I rose from my chair. I did it slowly, feeling every one of my 72 years and none of them. And I stood over the two of them, my son on the hearth and his wife rigid on the couch, and I want to tell you, I felt no triumph. I had expected to. For weeks, some part of me had hungered for this exact moment, had imagined it, had polished it in the dark. But standing there, looking down at the wreckage of the family Adelie and I had built with 40 years of our lives, I felt only a great and final sorrow. And beneath it, bedrock, the cold, clean certainty of a man closing an account that has been open far too long, and must be closed if anything true is ever to be built again. I did not raise my voice. I had never needed to. "Here is your grade," I said. "Look at me, both of you. You are going to hear it once. For 36 years, I said I gave grades to children, and I learned that a grade is not a punishment. It is a true accounting. It is the moment you are shown plainly the sum of the choices you made when you thought no one was keeping the book. So here is your accounting. I have kept the book." I looked at Cairo first. "You were not a cruel boy," I said. "You were a frightened one, and I made that worse, Because every time you fell, I built you a floor so quietly, you never learned the floor could end. I thought I was protecting you. I was crippling you. That is my failure, and I will carry it to my grave, and I confess it here in front of your son, so that he learns a father can be wrong. But my failure does not excuse yours. You forged my name. You mortgaged the roof over my head. You conspired to have me declared mad and locked in a place where men are sent to be forgotten. You did that, not your fear. You. He would not look up. Then I looked at Valentina. And you, I said, took an oath. First, do no harm. You wrote lies in a medical record. You filled an old man's house with gas. You used the trust the whole world places in a doctor as the very blade to cut him down. Of the two of you, I am sorry to say, you frighten me more, because he acted out of drowning, and you acted out of arithmetic. Now here is the accounting, and Mr. Turner will hold every word of it in writing. You will vacate the house on Crestwood by the end of the month. It is mine. It was always mine. You are tenants who defrauded your landlord, and your tenancy is ended. Where you go is not my concern. You have a car, and you have your health, and you have each other, which is more than you were willing to leave me. You will not fight it, because if you fight it, the forged deed goes to the district attorney that same morning, and the gas recording with it. As long as you go quietly and never again come near me or that house, or contact this family except through Mr. Turner, those recordings stay in a drawer. That is the arrangement. It is not mercy, it is a leash, and I am holding it, and I will hold it for the rest of my life. The conservatorship is finished, Patrick added quietly. We're filing this afternoon to establish Mr. Hurst's full capacity with a neutral physician and to seal the record. There will be no facility. There was never going to be. Valentina made one last sound, half a word, and I raised my hand, and she stopped. I am not finished, I said. There is one part of this account that is not a debt. It is a credit. And it is the only thing in this whole miserable business that I am proud of. I turned to the sofa to my grandson, who had sat through all of it with his eyes on me, holding on the way I had told him to. Nasir, I said, and my voice changed, and I let it. You did the bravest thing a person can do. You saw the people you love most in the world doing something evil, and you did not look away, and you did not go along, and you did not let fear make you complicit. You told the truth when the truth cost you everything you were afraid to lose. That is not betrayal, son. I told you once, it was the only real loyalty there is, and today you proved me right in front of witnesses. He was crying, but he was sitting up straight, and he was looking at me, and he was not ashamed. And I thought this is what Adelie saw. This is the boy she left her eyes to. Not by accident. She always could see further down the road than I could. You will come and live with me, I said, if you'll have an old man. Your room is already there. Your grandmother's books are already on the shelves waiting for you. And everything I have, all of it, the part nobody in this room knew about until this morning, is yours one day. Not because of blood, but because you are the only person under this roof who understood what blood is actually for. Cairo lifted his head then at last and looked at his son, and I saw him understand what he had lost, the whole of it in a single moment. And it was a worse sentence than any court could hand down, and I did not soften it because it was true, and he had earned it. They gathered their coats in silence. There was nothing left to say that would not make it worse. At the door, Valentina paused, and I thought she might try one final word, but she looked at my face and thought better of it, and went out into the cold. Cairo was last. He stopped on the threshold. He did not turn around. I'm sorry, he said to the door. I know, I said. And I was. That is the terrible part, son. I believe you are. It simply is not enough, and it never will be, and that is the accounting. He walked out. I closed the door behind him, and I turned the lock, and the house was quiet, and my grandson was still in it. 3 months have passed now, and I am telling you the end of it from the front porch of the little brick house on Auburn Avenue, the house they tried to take. The house that is still mine, still standing, still full in the evenings of the sound of a boy doing his homework at the kitchen table, where I once wrote a book. Nasir lives with me now. The court made it clean and simple once the truth was on the table, and Cairo did not fight it.
because Cairo could not afford, in any sense of that word, to fight anything anymore. The boy has his grandmother's books and his grandmother's eyes, and in the mornings he eats too much cornbread and complains about geometry, and the house that was too quiet for 2 years is not quiet anymore. And thank God for that. Thank God, truly. I did not know how heavy the silence had become until a child's noise lifted it off me. Cairo and Valentina left the house on Crestwood at the end of that month, as the accounting required. They live in an apartment across town now. He works, I'm told. Real work, the kind that does not come with columns. Valentina surrendered her license before the board could take it, which is its own kind of sentence for a woman who built her whole self on those letters after her name. They have not contacted me, as the arrangement demands, and they have not troubled Nasir, and the recordings sit in Patrick's drawer. A leash I will hold gently unpulled for as long as they leave us in peace. I did not send my son to prison. Some of you will think me weak for that, but he is still Nasir's father, and I would not put that weight on the boy, and there has been enough taken from this family without me handing a child the knowledge that his grandfather sent his father to a cell. That mercy was not for Cairo, it was for the boy. Nearly everything I have ever done, I understand now, has been for the boy, one boy or another. I have thought a great deal these 3 months about what all of it meant, and I want to leave you with what I found, because I did not walk through that fire to keep its lessons to myself. I learned that family is not the same thing as blood. Cairo shares my blood and hollowed out my life. Nasir shares my blood too, but that is not why he is my family. He is my family because when it cost him everything, he chose the truth and he chose me. Blood is an accident. Loyalty is a decision. And the people who are truly yours are the ones who keep deciding over and over to stand where the standing is hard. I learned that love without honesty is not love. It is fear wearing love's coat. For 40 years, I built floors under my son so quietly that he never learned to stand, and I called it devotion, and it was really my own terror of being needed too plainly, of being seen. Real love tells the truth. Real love lets a person feel the ground, even when the ground is hard, because a person who never feels the ground never learns to walk. God forgive me the years it took to understand that. God grant every parent listening the courage to learn it sooner than I did. And I learned that it is never too late. I am 72 years old. For a few terrible weeks, my own children very nearly convinced me that my life was over, that I was a burden, a cash cow past its season, a thing to be quietly warehoused and forgotten. And it was not true. My life was not over. It was, in fact, about to hold the most important thing it had ever held, which was the chance to raise, at the very end, one more good person, and to get it right this time. So if you are old, and the people who should cherish you have decided instead that you are in the way, hear me. You are not finished. You are not a burden. Your dignity does not expire, and no one, not your child, not a doctor, not a court, has the authority to declare you gone while you still know your own name. Keep your records, know your worth, and do not be afraid to hold up the ledger and show them plainly the true accounting of who was faithful and who was not. The porch light is on. The evening is cool and the street is quiet. The same street where an old man was once supposed to be quietly losing his mind. Inside, Nasir is calling me to come see something he built for his science class. In a moment, I will go in, and I will close the door on the cold. And no one in that warm house will ever again make me feel small. If this story reached something in you, I would be grateful if you would let me know you were here. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from tonight. And tell me this because I have asked myself every day since. Was I right to keep my son out of prison for the boy's sake? Or would you if it had been your family, your name, forged, your house nearly stolen, have let the full weight of the law fall? I would truly like to know. Take care of the old people who love you. And if you love an old person, tell them the truth and tell them they still matter. Tell them today.